The thunderous crack of a gunshot echoed through the night as Madeline James ducked behind the saloon's wooden barrel, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild Mustang. Jackson, Wyoming was supposed to be her fresh start, not another nightmare. The year was 1878, and the promise of a new life in the West had quickly soured into a desperate flight from danger. "You can't hide forever, songbird," the drunken voice of Silas Tucker, the saloon owner, slurred through the darkness. "Nobody walks out on me." Madeline's fingers trembled as she gathered her torn skirt. The position as a saloon singer had seemed like salvation when she'd arrived 3 weeks ago, penniless and alone. But Tucker's wandering hands and midnight visits to her room had revealed the true price of her employment. A second shot splintered the wood near her head. Madeline bit back a scream and ran blindly toward the edge of town, where the vast Wyoming wilderness offered the only escape. The cool night air whipped against her face as she fled, her thin shawl providing little protection against the spring chill. She didn't see the rock in her path until it was too late. Madeline's ankle twisted sharply, sending her tumbling down a small embankment. Pain shot through her leg as she landed hard at the bottom, the wind knocked from her lungs. "Please," she whispered to no one, tears streaming down her face. "Please help me." As if in answer, the soft nickering of a horse came from nearby. Madeline froze, listening intently. It wasn't Tucker's stallion, she'd recognize that beast anywhere. This sound was gentler, accompanied by the creak of leather and the soft clink of spurs. "Who's there?" a deep voice called out. Not threatening, but cautious, Madeline remained silent, pressing herself against the cool earth. "I know someone's out there," the voice continued. "I heard the shots from town. Are you hurt?" The stranger's boots crunched on the gravel as he approached. Moonlight revealed a tall figure leading a chestnut mare. His face was shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but his stance was relaxed, non-threatening. "Madam," he asked, spotting her huddled form. "Are you all right, please?" Madeline whispered, her voice catching. "He'll kill me if he finds me." The stranger knelt beside her, keeping a respectful distance. In the silver moonlight, she could make out kind eyes in a weathered face. "I'm Ross Quinn," he said simply. "Ranch foreman at the Double Creek, about 5 miles north of here. I don't make a habit of getting involved in other folks' business, but I do make exceptions when ladies are being shot at." Another distant shout from Tucker made Madeline flinch. "He's coming," she gasped. Without hesitation, Ross helped her to her feet. "Can you ride?" When she nodded, he lifted her onto his horse with surprising gentleness. "Hold tight to Penny here. She's steady as they come." He swung up behind her, careful not to touch her more than necessary. Madeline tensed at his proximity, but his hands remained firmly on the reins as he guided the mare away from town, following a small stream that would hide their tracks. "Thank you," Madeline whispered as Jackson disappeared behind them. "Don't thank me yet," Ross replied. "We've got a ways to go." The Double Creek Ranch emerged from the darkness like a painting gradually revealed. First the fence line, then the silhouettes of barns and corrals, and finally the modest main house with a single lamp burning in the window. Ross explained that the ranch owner, an elderly widow named Mrs. Eleanor Sullivan, was away visiting her daughter in Cheyenne, leaving him to manage the property with just 2 young ranch hands who slept in the bunkhouse. "You can stay in the main house tonight," Ross told her as he helped her dismount. "No one will think to look for you here." Madeline winced as she put weight on her injured ankle. Without asking permission, Ross swept her into his arms and carried her toward the house. She should have protested. This kind of familiar touch from a stranger went against every rule of propriety, but the throbbing pain and bone-deep exhaustion silenced her objections. Inside, the ranch house was simple but comfortable, with handmade furniture and colorful quilts that spoke of a woman's touch. Ross settled Madeline on a wooden chair in the kitchen and busied himself lighting lamps and stoking the banked fire in the stove. "Let me see that ankle," he said, kneeling before her with a basin of water. When she hesitated, he added, I've doctored enough horses and cowboys to know my way around a sprain. With gentle fingers, he removed her boot and examined the swollen joint. Madeline studied him as he worked. In the lamplight, she could see he was perhaps 30, with sun-browned skin and laugh lines around his eyes. His dark hair was overdue for a trim, and a small scar crossed his left eyebrow. "It's not broken," he pronounced, "but you won't be dancing for a few days." Madeline flinched at the mention of dancing. "I'm not a," she began hotly, then stopped herself. "I was a singer at Tucker's saloon, nothing more. Never said you were anything else, miss." His voice trailed off in question. "James, Madeline James, Miss James." He nodded respectfully. "I need to wrap this ankle, and if you don't mind my saying, you look like you could use something to eat." While Ross prepared a simple meal of beans, bacon, and biscuits left from supper, Madeline explained how she'd come to Jackson. After her father's death in Boston 6 months earlier, she discovered his gambling debts had left her penniless. With no family and few options for a respectable woman alone, she'd used the last of her money to travel west, where she'd heard women could find honest work. "Tucker seemed kind at first," she admitted, watching the flames dance in the stove. "He offered room and board plus wages to sing in the saloon. I thought it was Providence." "Tucker's got a reputation," Ross said grimly, placing a plate before her. "Not a good one." They ate in companionable silence. When Madeline could barely keep her eyes open, Ross showed her to Mrs. Sullivan's bedroom. "Get some rest," he said from the doorway. "You're safe here." "Where will you sleep?" Madeline asked, suddenly concerned about the impropriety of their arrangement. Ross smiled slightly. "I've got a cot in the barn, been sleeping there most nights anyway, to be near a mare about to foal, nothing unusual about it." As he turned to leave, Madeline called after him, "Mr. Quinn, thank you for everything." He touched the brim of his hat. "Get some sleep, Miss James." Madeline awoke to sunlight streaming through lace curtains and the distant sounds of ranch life. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, then memory flooded back. Tucker, the gunshots, Ross Quinn carrying her to safety. A soft knock at the door preceded the entrance of a silver-haired woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense expression. "Good morning, dear. I'm Martha Wilson, the housekeeper. I come in 3 times a week from town. Ross told me about your situation." She helped Madeline dress in a borrowed dress that was slightly too large but clean and serviceable, then supported her as they made their way to the kitchen, where Ross stood at the stove, frying eggs. He turned, and for a moment, something flickered in his eyes that made Madeline's heart skip. Then he smiled politely. "Good morning, Miss James. How's the ankle?" "Better, thank you," she replied, though it still throbbed painfully. "Ross says you need a safe place to stay," Martha said, pouring coffee. "And I say the Lord works in mysterious ways. Mrs. Sullivan wrote just yesterday asking me to find someone to help around the house while she's away. Her visit to her daughter will be extended. Seems her daughter's expecting a child and needs her mother's help." "I couldn't impose," Madeline began. "It's not charity," Ross interrupted. "It's a job. Room, board, and a small wage to help with the cooking and mending. Martha can't be here every day, and Mrs. Sullivan would rest easier knowing someone's looking after things." The offer was a lifeline Madeline hadn't dared hope for. "I accept," she said. "Though I should warn you, my cooking skills are limited," Martha chuckled. "These cowboys wouldn't know gourmet from gruel. Just keep them fed and they'll be grateful." Over the next 2 weeks, Madeline settled into life at the Double Creek. Her ankle healed slowly, but she insisted on earning her keep, learning from Martha how to manage a ranch kitchen and taking over small chores around the house. The 2 young ranch hands, Jimmy and Pete, were respectful if shy around her. Ross, however, remained something of a mystery. He was unfailingly polite, checking on her welfare each morning and evening, but maintaining a careful distance that both relieved and oddly disappointed her. One evening, as sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Madeline found Ross on the porch, whittling a small piece of wood. "May I join you?" she asked hesitantly. He nodded, moving aside on the bench. They sat in silence for a while, watching the colors fade from the sky. "What are you making?" she finally asked, nodding toward the wood in his hands. "Just a horse," he replied. "Something to keep my hands busy." Madeline studied his profile, wondering about the man who had rescued her without question. "You've been very kind, Mr. Quinn." "Ross," he corrected gently, "and kindness doesn't cost anything." "Still," she persisted, "you've risked a lot." "If Tucker discovers I'm here, Tucker won't find you," Ross said firmly. "And if he did, he'd regret it." The quiet determination in his voice sent a shiver through her that wasn't entirely fear. "Have you lived in Wyoming long?" she asked, changing the subject. "All my life." "My father ran cattle north of Cheyenne. I grew up in the saddle." His hands continued their steady work on the carving. "When he died, the bank took everything. I've been working other men's land since." "I'm sorry," Madeline said softly. Ross shrugged. "It taught me what matters. Not the land itself, but what you build on it, the people you share it with." "Is that why you stay here? For Mrs. Sullivan?" "Partly. She gave me a chance when others wouldn't." He glanced at her. "What about you? Will you go back east when you can?" Madeline considered the question. "There's nothing for me there, just memories and debts." And here, their eyes met in the gathering dusk. "I don't know yet," she answered honestly, "but I'm grateful for the chance to find out." The days lengthened as spring ripened toward summer. Madeline's presence at the Double Creek gradually transformed from temporary arrangement to something that felt permanent. She planted a vegetable garden behind the house, took over the household accounts with a skill that impressed Ross, and even learned to ride one of the gentler horses, exploring the ranch's rolling meadows and aspen groves. Ross watched her blooming like a wildflower after rain, revealing layers of strength and intelligence he found increasingly captivating. She wasn't just beautiful, though. Her honey-brown hair and clear green eyes certainly caught his attention, but resilient in a way that spoke to something deep within him. As for Madeline, she discovered in Ross a steadiness she'd never known in any man. He worked from dawn till dusk, managing the ranch with quiet competence. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch, talking about everything and nothing as the stars appeared overhead. "My father wanted a son," she told him one night. "When my mother died birthing me, he never quite forgave me for being a girl or for surviving when she didn't." Ross's hand found hers in the darkness, a brief touch that sent warmth spiraling through her. "He was a fool then," he said simply. News from town reached them through Martha. Tucker was still searching for Madeline, offering a reward for information. But as weeks passed with no sign of danger, the knot of fear in Madeline's chest began to loosen, until the day Jimmy rode in from town, his young face flushed with worry. "Ross. Tucker's asking questions about the ranch, about Miss James. I think someone talked." Ross's expression hardened. "Get Pete. Check all the fences, make sure the stock is secure. If Tucker shows up, he might not come peacefully." When the young man had gone, Madeline approached Ross, her hands twisting in her apron. "This is my fault. I've put everyone in danger." "No," Ross said firmly. "Tucker's the only one at fault here. But I should leave. Draw him away from the ranch." Ross caught her shoulders gently. "Running isn't the answer, Maddie." The nickname slipped out without thought. "You have a home here now, people who care what happens to you." Her eyes met his, reading the unspoken message. "People like you." For a moment, the careful distance he'd maintained seemed to crumble. "Yes," he said quietly, "like me." The sound of approaching horses interrupted whatever might have followed. Ross quickly moved to the gun cabinet, withdrawing his rifle. "Stay inside," he ordered, his voice brooking no argument. From the window, Madeline watched as Tucker and 3 men rode into the yard. Ross stood on the porch, rifle not quite aimed but clearly ready. "Quinn," Tucker called, reining in his horse. "Heard you've got something that belongs to me." "Nothing here belongs to you, Tucker," Ross replied evenly. "This is private property. I suggest you leave." Tucker's florid face twisted with malice. "The girl, Quinn, hand her over and we'll be on our way." "There's no girl here to hand over, just the people who work this ranch." Tucker spat on the ground. She's property, same as any other contract. She owes me. People aren't property, Ross said, his voice dangerously quiet. And contracts signed under duress aren't worth the paper they're written on. One of Tucker's men shifted nervously. Silas, maybe we should shut up, Tucker snarled. He turned back to Ross. I'm taking her back, Quinn, one way or another. Ross raised his rifle slightly. No, you're not. The tension stretched between them like a bowstring pulled too tight. Then, from behind the barn, Pete and Jimmy appeared, each armed and positioned strategically. Tucker assessed the situation with narrowed eyes. You're making a mistake, Quinn. This isn't over. Yes, it is, Ross replied. Madeline James is under my protection now. You come near her again and I won't be this hospitable. For a moment, Madeline thought Tucker would push it further. Then, with a muttered curse, he wheeled his horse around. Let's go, boys. Ain't worth dying over some singing whore. The slur cut through Madeline like a knife. She sank to the floor beneath the window, hot tears of shame burning her eyes. Is that what everyone thought? That she was just another fallen woman. The reputation would follow her forever in a place like Jackson. She didn't hear Ross enter the house, didn't realize he was there until he knelt beside her. Maddie, he said softly. He's gone, you're safe. For how long? She asked, not meeting his eyes. He'll be back, or someone else will. I'll always be what he said. No, Ross said fiercely. You're not what he says. You're what you choose to be. She finally looked up at him, her face streaked with tears. I chose to sing in his saloon. I was so desperate I didn't question why the pay was so good, why he was so eager to hire me. I was a fool. You were surviving, Ross corrected. There's no shame in that. Madeline turned away. I can't stay here. I'm ruining everything you've built. Is that what you want, to leave? The question hung between them, weighted with all they hadn't said. No, she whispered finally. But I'm ashamed of bringing this trouble to your door, to Mrs. Sullivan's ranch. Ross gently turned her face back toward his. You have nothing to be ashamed of, he said with quiet conviction. Something broke open inside Madeline at his words, a dam of fear and doubt that had been holding back emotions too powerful to name. Before she could reconsider, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. Ross froze for an instant, then responded with a tenderness that made her heart ache. His hands came up to cradle her face as if she were something infinitely precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ross rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that since the night I found you, he admitted. Why didn't you? Because you needed safety more than you needed complications. His thumb traced the line of her jaw. Because I wanted you to choose, not feel obligated. Madeline smiled through the remnants of her tears. I'm choosing now. Their second kiss was deeper, a promise neither spoke aloud but both understood. Whatever came next, they would face it together. True to Ross's prediction, Tucker did return not with guns but with the sheriff. Madeline stood on the porch beside Ross as the lawman examined the so-called contract Tucker claimed she'd signed. This ain't legal, Sheriff Davis declared finally. A performance contract doesn't give you ownership rights, Tucker. And these terms, he shook his head in disgust, would be questionable even if she had read and agreed to them. Tucker's face flushed with anger. She owes me for room and board, then? I believe that matter is settled, came a new voice. Eleanor Sullivan, a diminutive woman with silver hair and the bearing of royalty, descended from a hired buggy. Miss James has more than earned her keep at the Double Creek. Any debt she might have incurred at your establishment is hereby paid in full. She handed the sheriff an envelope. This should cover it with interest. I believe our business is concluded. Tucker sputtered in protest, but the sheriff was already moving him toward his horse. You're lucky Mrs. Sullivan's being so generous, Tucker. Now get back to town before I decide to look into some of the other complaints I've had about your establishment. When they had gone, Mrs. Sullivan turned to Madeline with kind eyes. So you're the young lady who's been keeping my house in order. Martha writes that you've been a godsend. I've tried to earn my keep, madam, Madeline replied nervously. And then some, from what I hear. The older woman's gaze shifted between Madeline and Ross, noting their proximity with a raised eyebrow. Perhaps we should go inside and discuss the future arrangements. To Madeline's surprise, Mrs. Sullivan not only approved of her continued employment at the ranch, but also seemed unsurprised by Ross's careful explanation of their growing attachment. "Life's too short for unnecessary complications," the widow declared. "I've seen how you look at each other in the 5 minutes I've been here. If there's something worth building between you, build it." Summer flowed into autumn, bringing golden light to the aspens and a rich harvest from Madeline's garden. Her position at the Double Creek evolved as she took on more responsibilities, freeing Mrs. Sullivan to travel between the ranch and her daughter's family in Cheyenne. Ross courted her properly, with chaperone dinners in town and Sunday rides that always seemed to end with them lingering by the creek that gave the ranch its name. By the first snowfall, they were engaged, planning a spring wedding once the winter's isolation ended, on Christmas Eve with Mrs. Sullivan presiding over a feast that brought together the entire ranch community. Ross presented Madeline with a small wooden box. "It isn't much," he said as she opened it to reveal a simple gold band set with a small pearl. "It was my mother's. My father gave everything else away to pay his debts, but I managed to keep this." "It's perfect," Madeline whispered, tears blurring her vision as he slipped it onto her finger. Later, as they stood alone on the porch watching snow drift lazily from the star-filled sky, Ross pulled her close against the cold. "I've been saving," he told her. "The north pasture, the one that connects to Double Creek, came up for sale last month. Mrs. Sullivan helped me make an arrangement with the bank." Madeline turned in his arms, searching his face. "You bought land." 20 acres, he confirmed. "Enough to build a house. Start our own herd eventually. Mrs. Sullivan says I can keep working as her foreman while we get established." "Our own home," Madeline breathed, the concept almost too wonderful to grasp. "It won't be fancy," Ross cautioned. "Just a start." Madeline rose on tiptoe to kiss him, unconcerned about who might see through the window. "It will be ours," she said. "That's what matters." Spring arrived with a rush of green that transformed the Wyoming landscape. The creek swelled with snowmelt, wildflowers carpeted the meadows, and on the small rise where Ross had begun building their home, Madeline stood in a simple white dress adorned with blue ribbons. Their wedding was a community affair, with neighbors from miles around gathering to celebrate. Mrs. Sullivan hosted the reception at the main house, while the ceremony itself took place on the land that would be their future. As Madeline spoke her vows, the memory of that desperate night fleeing through the darkness seemed like another lifetime. In its place stood this new reality. Ross's steady hands holding hers, his voice clear and certain as he promised to cherish her all his days. "You saved me," she told him later as they danced under lantern light in the barn, their friends and neighbors celebrating around them. "No," Ross disagreed, pulling her closer. "You saved yourself. You had the courage to run that night, to start over." "All I did was offer a hand when you needed one." Madeline smiled up at her husband. "Then we saved each other, and we'll keep doing it every day." As spring deepened into summer, their small house took shape on the rise overlooking the creek. Ross and the ranch hands raised the frame, while Madeline worked alongside them, learning to drive nails and sand rough boards. By August, it was habitable enough for them to move in, though far from finished. "It's perfect," Madeline declared on their first night, looking around at the simple furniture Ross had crafted and the colorful quilt Mrs. Sullivan had given them as a wedding gift. Ross pulled her into his arms. "It's just a beginning," and so it was. That autumn brought news that Madeline was expecting their first child, filling Ross with a mixture of joy and terrified anticipation. Throughout the winter, as Madeline's body changed and grew, he worked on finishing the nursery, carving a cradle from aspen wood and building shelves for the children's books Madeline had begun collecting. Their son, William James Quinn, arrived on a warm May evening with Mrs. Sullivan and the local midwife attending the birth. Ross paced the porch until the baby's first cry rang out, then rushed in to find Madeline exhausted but radiant, cradling a red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair. "He looks like you," she said, making room for Ross to sit beside her on the bed. Ross touched his son's tiny hand with wonder. "He's perfect." Life settled into a new rhythm around the baby. Ross divided his time between Mrs. Sullivan's ranch and their own growing operation, while Madeline managed the household and tended to their son. By William's first birthday, they had acquired a small herd of cattle and built a proper barn. Visitors from town occasionally brought news of Silas Tucker. His saloon had burned down the previous winter in accident, according to the sheriff, though rumors suggested unpaid debts to some unsavory characters from Cheyenne. Tucker himself had moved on, heading further west to try his luck in the Nevada mining towns. "Good riddance," was Ross's only comment, on a golden afternoon in late summer as William toddled after a butterfly in the yard. Madeline found Ross by the corral, watching a new foal test its spindly legs. "I got a letter today," she said, leaning against the fence beside him. "From Boston." Ross raised an eyebrow in question. "Remember I told you about my father's lawyer? He's been trying to settle the estate." Madeline unfolded the letter. "It seems not all of father's investments were worthless. There was a small shipping company it finally sold. After the debts were paid, there's something left." "How much?" Ross asked, curiosity evident in his voice. "Enough to expand," Madeline said with a smile. "Add that north section you've been eyeing, maybe build a proper house next year." Ross whistled low. "That's unexpected." "Does it bother you that I'm bringing money into our marriage?" he laughed, pulling her close. "Maddie, you've brought everything good into my life. Money's just a tool. It's what we build together that matters." She rested her head against his shoulder, watching their son chase the butterfly in dizzy circles. "I never imagined this life," she admitted. "That night in Jackson, running from Tucker, I thought my life was over, that I'd never be anything but ashamed and afraid." "And now?" Ross asked softly. Madeline turned in his arms, rising on tiptoe to kiss him with all the love that had grown between them over the past 2 years. "Now I know better," she whispered against his lips. "Now I know what it means to be truly free." As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, Ross lifted William onto his shoulders and took Madeline's hand. Together, they walked the boundaries of their land, pointing out to their son the places where dreams had taken root and grown into something real and lasting. In the distance, the double creek sparkled like a silver ribbon, connecting past to present, winding its way toward a future as boundless as the Wyoming sky above them.